I'm David Volk, a voice of the resistance, albeit a strange and silly one. Today's post, My Vacation Turns Electric, or How I Spent the First Day of My Summer Vacation. If I was still in high school and my teacher asked me how I spent my summer vacation, my answer would be simple, really. I spent it driving. Driving, and more driving. And not in a good way. I wasn't on a road trip exactly. I was on a mission. An epic search, really, for electricity. I'm not saying that Salt Lake City is backwards and hasn't electrified all of its businesses and residences exactly. I guess some explanation is in order. My wife and I flew into Salt Lake City Airport last Monday to attend our son's graduation. Our flight arrived around midnight as scheduled, but the airline hadn't cleared its gate, so we had to wait to get into the airport. I don't know if this had anything to do with what followed, but we did get to the Avis car rental counter much later than we expected to pick up the car we had reserved. As in, I went to the website, booked a car, and told Avis what time I was arriving so that there would be a, quote, Toyota Corolla or similar car, end quote, available when we arrived. You can see where at least part of this is going, can't you? Although the Oxford English Dictionary defines reservation as, quote, an act of engaging a seat, room, place, ticket, vehicle, etc. in advance, an engagement secured in this way, a booking. Apparently, rental car companies have a different definition, which means, an excuse to choose us over another car company because they won't have what you want either, end quote. In my case, I wanted an economy car, but the agent told me the only car that they had at that moment was a Subaru Battlestar or some other similar name that translated to gas-guzzling SUV that gets 2 gas stations to the mile, which I definitely didn't want considering today's gas prices, even though we did have to pack up my son's room. After much back and forth, he admitted they also had 3 electric cars, a Ford Mach-E, a Tesla, or a Hyundai something or other. There is no way in hell I'm going to drive a swastika car, and I hate Ford only slightly less because the company's founder was a noted anti-Semite. But my wife didn't trust the Hyundai, so Ford it was. And so we rolled out of the airport with a 68% charge and an admonition to return it with at least 70% charge, or the rental car agency would, what? Go to our house and siphon away the difference? Charge us by the kilowatt hour? No problem, I thought. I have an electric car and I know all about charging. Silly me. The first order of business the next day was to find a charger and get the damn thing fully charged because it was already down to 56%. So I left my wife at the hotel with 90 minutes to get it at least partially charged and a list of chargers not far away. Easy, right? Oh, all of the chargers at the first place were in use. The second was at a restaurant and was for the use of customers, and I wasn't particularly hungry, so I drove on. The next was nowhere to be found, even though it was supposed to be close, and so it went. Keep in mind that each charging station was 5 to 10 minutes away from the previous one, so by this point I had burned about 40 minutes of my time without anything to show for it except a charge that was down to around 53%. Since the Ford navigation system had its own list of chargers that were part of the so-called Ford charging network, I decided to start using the Ford's navigation system to look for these as well. So now I have my phone's Maps app and the Ford both telling me where to turn, often in conflicting directions, always at the same time. Up until this point in my life, I used to joke that I never got lost because people were always telling me where to go. But this was ridiculous. Not too surprisingly, the Ford system directed me to a Ford dealership that had chargers. Surprisingly, not one of the 4 chargers worked. Not wanting to hassle with over-ear salespeople, I kept going. As a last-ditch effort with about 30 minutes left, I went to a La Quinta hotel where I plugged in and got the error message, charging failed. I wasn't sure what it meant, but I was pretty sure I had been in a morning-long charging fail. So I headed back to the hotel where my wife told me she had just learned there were chargers in the hotel garage. I called the hotel and got directions, but misunderstood them and couldn't find the chargers. I then stopped at the front desk, got the correct directions, and discovered 8 refueling spots, all of them in use. By now, it was time to take my wife to our son's school so she could help decorate for the graduation, which meant driving with the car down to 50%. She expected it to take an hour, giving me an additional 60 minutes to accomplish my mission. My travels took me to a train commuter lot where someone at my son's school assured me there were chargers, but there weren't at any of the 3 lots I visited. A hospital where the chargers were supposed to be for patients and visitors only, but they didn't work, so it didn't matter. A Tesla charging station that was for Teslas only, because that's the kind of asshole Elon is, and a small electric utility where all of the chargers were in use. By the time I returned to the school to take my wife to her next destination, I was down to 48%. Sensing my concern, one of the school staffers called her husband and got a list of EV chargers. Given that the first 2 on the list were places I'd already stopped, I was not optimistic, but my wife had an hour-long appointment for beautification or some such thing the guys don't do because, they figure they look just fine, even if they really don't. Beaten and bowed, I consulted the list and found an EV charger that actually worked. So I plugged in and went to celebrate with a frap from Beans and Brews a few blocks away. That was the good news. The bad news was that in the 40 minutes I had been gone, it had only gained a 4% charge, up to 52%. At this rate, I figured I'd be able to leave Salt Lake City sometime around the next presidential election, if there was one. Since it was going to be the last night my wife and I were going to be alone before our son returned home, we celebrated with a date night. Spent charging the car at South Jordan City Hall. Isn't it romantic? Even then, we only picked up an additional 3% before limping back to our hotel, where we were shocked to find that all of the chargers were available and working. Even though they weren't fast chargers, they were fast enough to fully charge our car overnight. Which just goes to show that the moral of the story is that sometimes there is no moral. Unless, of course, that sometimes it's better and less stressful to go with the Subaru Galleon, or whatever it's called, than it is to jangle your nerves by trying to save the planet. As for me, I still love driving, just not that kind of driving. That's it. Show's over. Nothing left to see here. Everybody head on home where you probably already have a level 2 EV charger and don't have to keep on driving looking for one. I've been David Volk, a voice of the resistance, albeit a strange and refueled one.